Hello, Canada. My name's Karen Aplin. I work in the physics department at Oxford University in the UK.
And hello from me too. I'm Paul Williams, and I'm a research fellow in the Department of Meteorology at the University of Reading in the UK.
Well, I play the double bass in an orchestra, and I've done that for quite a long time, since I was quite young. And I realised that quite a lot of the pieces that we did seemed to represent the weather. They had weather in the title, or the conductor would sometimes tell us, look, you're supposed to be raindrops here, play like this. And that got me thinking, and it seemed quite common for these weather pictures to crop up in music.
Especially the seasons and the changing of the seasons and watching leaves fall off the trees and lakes freeze over. Of course, it's easy to represent all of this stuff in paintings, but what really excited us here was how to do it in music, which is much more subtle.
I think the thing that surprised me that I hadn't been expecting was that composers tend to write about their home weather, almost always. So you might think that they're inspired by poems and literature and art and mythology, and they are in some ways, but actually when they want to write about a storm, they'll just think about the type of storm that they see most often outside their window, and they'll picture that. And I found that really interesting conclusion.
And I think a consequence of that was that what we found was that British composers were living up to our national stereotype here, and we found, I think, twice as many pieces of representations of storms by British composers than by composers of any other nationality. So we're sort of guilty as charged there on the weather obsession.
In the Pastoral Symphony, there's this storm movement, which is pretty exciting, and it sort of starts to get going with some low instruments sort of representing perhaps distant thunder, and maybe sort of clouds rolling in, and then the low instruments, they get louder and louder, so it's the double basses and the timpani and the cellos. And then they start to play scales, so notes going up and down very quickly, and then the higher instruments join in. And then eventually we have really high instruments like a sort of high-pitched flute called a piccolo, and that plays lightning, so it just gets louder and louder and it gets closer and closer, and it's a very exciting picture of storm in music. The first thing to do is just to write down all the different types of weather that cropped up in music, and all the pieces that had weather in and the different ways the weather was represented.
Yeah, and we came up with 35 pieces. Now I'm sure we've missed a few pieces off, but we did as good a job as we could, asked all our friends and musicians, and we came up with as comprehensive a list as I think we could have done.
We found that storms were the most popular weather to represent, and then we found it was gloomy weather that composers liked the most, probably because of the sort of drama that you can get. So we found it was storms, then wind, then rain, then cloud were the most popular types of weather to picture.
What we found much less of was representations of nice weather. Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, Summer, has a representation of the sunshine in it, but that was quite rare compared to the representations of storms.
Yeah. I think we intended this study initially to be a one-off. It was just a little interesting thing to look at to see what we could find. But having sort of seen the massive level of interest that we've had in it, it's quite tempting to try and look a bit more at different types of music and how they represent weather. Pop music would be an obvious one. But I think if we looked in the future, if climate is changing, we might expect to see a response, but I think possibly not in our lifetimes. Maybe in 100 years you could look at the classical pieces that are being written and see what they pick up.
Yeah, I work as a climate scientist for my day job, and it's clear that the climate is changing and will continue to change. So one does wonder what music we might be writing at the end of this century as a consequence of the changing climate.